Now, we continue with our focus on women because it's still August, it's Women's Month. Now, this afternoon, we look at economic security for women in South Africa. The Stellenbosch Business School is hosting thought leaders on economic security for women in the Global South. Joining us for this conversation is Dr Nthabiseng Moleko, Economist at Stellenbosch Business School. Good afternoon, Doctor. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. What a timely conversation. I mean, this week, Stats SA released the unemployment figures now standing at 33.2%, with women, of course, unfortunately shouldering a disproportionate burden of unemployment, underemployment, and even lower workforce participation. Firstly, your views on just this persistent trend, even in 2025.
Thank you so much for having me, and a very good afternoon. Listen, this is a real show that the continued worsening of the labor market unemployment levels, as shown by the skewed unemployment towards particularly Black Africans, but also the concentration of unemployment amongst women and the youth, requires a very significant policy response. And I think the level of emergency and the level of response to the kind of problem that this economic insecurity, unemployment, and the labor market that is unable to absorb the majority of South Africans is receiving is not the level to which the problems that will emanate from this lack of distribution of profits, of benefits to the economic booms that we have seen, and the depravity in the economy. I think we have to urgently, with the kind of results we have seen, where you are seeing more than 11 million South Africans not working, not economically active, and in the main, youth and women on the brunt of it, there's simply no response at the level of crises that we are seeing. And I think it's frightening if these unemployed 3.1 more discouraged work seekers are coming to the fore. People are simply losing hope. And I think we have to look inwardly and have, I would say, an urgent discussion on the economic outcomes and the economic instruments and the economic strategies that we are deploying, because it is a crisis.
Most certainly, and I suppose that's why many people would always encourage that there be such workshops. But I also want us to tackle this significant policy response and what the policy should look like. But to your workshop first, there are many structural obstacles, even in 2025, that continue to hinder women's full participation in the economy. So, like I stated, recognizing and meaningfully engaging on these barriers to unlock Africa's economic potential will never be a conversation that many say is tired. But talk to us about the themes that you intend to tackle tomorrow around this issue and the barriers.
So we're looking tomorrow really at the issue of what does it mean to be a woman in this economy that we're in? There is real serious structural discrimination in employment and in the quality of employment across the African labor market, but more in particular, we're looking at South Africa and we're looking at Ghana and West Africa and the representation of women and the composition of women across different occupations. So by policy design, the outcomes of that will tell us that women may be in the informal sector to a large extent. Women are not homogenous. We also know that the stratification of women across the sectors depends largely not only on skills and the level of skills one has, but there's also factors in the labor market that cause women to not necessarily have the same wages, and they have disparities, things like care work, issues of across occupation responsibility for unpaid care work. We know that there's disadvantages to women, disproportionately so, in unpaid work to the extent that men face these. So the literature is very clear on all these issues, but what we have done beyond that is to look at the evidence, to look at the data that Stats SA is producing, and to look at what is happening from a data perspective. And then therefore, with these results on the employment quality, with these results on what we have seen with the different strata and class of women, what therefore should be done from a policy perspective and what should be implemented. So ours is to say there need to be a policy response that is based on evidence. We need to look at the gender disparities from income security, old age income security. Many of our women are getting old, but in terms of having access to old age benefits, occupational pensions, if you're a domestic worker, Do you have access to income security when you retire? Are there instruments that speak to that? No, they're not. Why are we not having that discussion if more than 1 million Black African women in the main are in this sector? Why is the financial system not creating products or being encouraged by the state to create applicable products so that these sections and portions of the population are actually taken care of, not just by the state, but you create instruments where they can actually be absorbed? The self-employed, the own account workers, are there instruments that enable them, to participate later on? And so the discussion is more on the two-pot system. The discussion is always on consumption. We're not looking at what are the ways for us to increase savings, to enhance income, to enhance our employment security. The third aspect we look at is employment security in the labor market. Are our women and are our people in general seeing rigidity and also this move towards removing rigid labor markets for a more flexible market through the neoliberal ideology? How is that impacting employment quality? How is that impacting our legislative enforcement? How is that impacting restrictions and also the rights of workers and the collective bargaining of workers? And this is what the data is going to point us to results. And I think the policy recommendations will look at these issues.
I love the point you make about women not being a homogenous group. That here you've got semi-skilled, you've got highly skilled, but it seems that when the conversation about ensuring greater participation of women or transformation in the labor space, that many seem to want to just simplify things, just to be very simplistic and say they are a homogenous group. If indeed we must transform and place women at the top, we'll just choose any woman. And then unfortunately sometimes you have a misrepresentation of women where maybe this one is semi-skilled, but now they occupy a very senior level. They're not necessarily all that capable to acquit themselves well in that position. And then unfortunately, it then almost starts a narrative around women being incompetent, but it always started with them assuming that we're a homogenous group. If you just put a female, that's enough.
So we know that women are not homogenous. We know that women are in informal versus formal workspaces. We know that the conditions for work, if you're in the informal sector, they differ in terms of written contracts. They differ in terms of your access to leave, maternity leave. Even your access to collective bargaining differs. We know that women in the formal sector have different occupation sets. We know that they have different levels. So you could be a normal worker, you could be a management director, exec, etc. The incidence of employment security differs primarily by sector of work, by nature of work, and also the enforcement applicable. So this is determined primarily, by the employment protection legislation that you have. We also know that the issues of care, we know that the issues of discrimination in the workforce, sexual harassment in the workforce, these dominate some of the discussion around the discrimination that women face at times in the workforce. We also know issues of glass ceilings are different sector by sector. So the issues of if you're in the STEM sectors, which are largely male-dominated, right? The construction, the technical or technological, environmental management, and so forth. So all the policy tools that you need to employ for the different types of skill sets that women have, for the different sectors, for the different levels and the occupations that women employ, whether you're in the informal or formal sector. These are very different and encompass a different type of instrument, measuring tool, monitoring, and even enforcement, because the avoidance of enforcing and also applying the legislation that is around employment protection differs. If you're educated, you're in the corporate space, you face a very different situation when looking for paid sick leave if you are in the informal sector, or you are not having a written contract that you can enforce, and even the skills level that you have is limited. So all of these things we look at the data. We are creating an index on employment security for South Africa, and we're also looking at Ghana as well. And we're using Stats SA PALMS data to help us so that when we do come out with findings and make recommendations, they are based on evidence. And why are we doing this? We want labor market stability. We want to make sure that women don't have casualization of work, and also generally the benefits of ensuring, income stability, less of a gender wage gap, and all these dimensions of casualization of work, making sure that you weaken that outcome and you increase employment security is better for the economy, is better for social cohesion, is better for equity, and actually it makes your workers more productive. And I think we've got to understand that there are gains to dealing with gender disparities, identifying the source and the root problems, and making sure that you try to resolve some of these crises, because they can be resolved.
Dr. Nthabiseng certainly cannot wait for the outcomes of that workshop. I suppose this is taking place tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.